Learning to program is a great opportunity to pick up some good practice techniques. Here we will look at a collection of basic tips and methods that will make your code more readable and more efficient. Firstly, the structure of your program or script should try to separate the main components away from each other. This is a basic readability tip. For example, if we start writing a program, it's recommended that you load any modules at the beginning. Next, define your functions and have both of these separate from the main program. The main program will essentially be declaring any variables, calculations, and loops. So here we have a simple example where we show the first module as NumPy and we import it. Next we define any functions, and we've got one here called Lorenz, which takes two inputs, velocity and the speed of light, and returns the gamma factor or the Lorenz factor. The main program itself simply defines the variables and then calls the Lorenz function. We also include here an if statement to check whether the velocity is greater than the speed of light, and if it is, we print a message to warn the user. Otherwise, we calculate the Lorenz factor as per normal. We'll use this example to point out other good practice tips. Firstly, once you've got your script, you're going to save it as a file, and typically a Python file will end in .py. Regardless of which language you're using, it's always good to avoid any spaces in the file name. A good tip here is to use what's known as Camel Case, which is removing any spaces between words and capitalizing the first letters of each word to make it apparent. You should also apply this to the case of folders and directories. The key reason why we avoid spaces in file names is that later on, if we do program to do a data analysis, for example, we'll want to load files from a certain directory or path, and not having spaces in those paths makes it a lot easier to do. Here we will call this script gamma factor. We will capitalize G and F. Next, one of the key good practice methods is to document your code, and this is a combination of comments and doc strings. A doc string is defined in Python using 3 double quotes, and it's a message at the top of your file explaining the context of the program, who wrote it, and when it was last updated. Doc strings can also be used to describe the contents and purpose of functions, and indeed they create the help file for each function when you query with a question mark. Comments are defined using a hash symbol at the beginning of the line and essentially removes that line from being interpreted as code. Typically, comments are very frequently found in any program, and you can use them to create almost a narrative of the logic of your program. Modules essentially contain external functions that you can load into your program. And when doing this in Python, it's always best to load a module such as NumPy using an alias or a shorter version of the module name. This shortening of the name then enables you to call functions from that module a little bit more efficiently than if you had to rewrite the full name each time. We will take a closer look at functions and modules in a later lecture. The next good practice tip is to keep your function and variable names short and useful. This will again improve readability and will make your code much more compact. End-of-line comments can also be useful to describe in more detail the contents of specific lines of code. In this example, you can see I've specified the units of my velocity in meters per second, and it's a very short addition to the line, but it's very, very useful. You may have noticed that there are indentations on the left-hand side of our Python script. These have a real purpose in separating different blocks of code, and it means that the interpreter understands when a function starts and finishes, or when a loop or an if statement starts and finishes. Fortunately, the indentations are automatic when you write in Python, but it's worth observing that they need to be a fixed relative length, and in this case we've got 4 blank spaces. These collection of good practice tips are just the beginning. As we go forward in this course, we will also look at more advanced good practice, which involves memory management and coding for efficiency in your calculations.